All right, so today we're diving deep into the world of timber framing. Specifically, we're talking about choosing the right wood for projects that are going to last. And we've got some awesome sources to guide us. We've got advice from a seasoned timber framer named Sam. I'm really excited to pick his brain.
Yeah, it sounds like Sam really knows his stuff. Picking the right wood, it really is the foundation of any good timber framing project.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he broke it down into what he considers the three main contenders: oak, Douglas fir, and spruce. The classics. We've got to start with oak. I mean, it's
Yeah.
almost like when you think timber framing, you think oak, right? There's a reason it's got that reputation for strength and being around forever.
Yeah, it's incredibly durable. We're talking like centuries old buildings held up by these massive oak beams, medieval castles.
Yeah.
That's a testament to how strong it is. But it's not just about like brute strength. Oak actually has a really high strength to weight ratio too.
So it's not just about how heavy the piece of wood is itself, but how much weight it can actually hold relative to that, right?
Exactly. And that density plays into how workable it is too. Oh, can be tough, like really tough to work with, requires some muscle. I think Sam even mentioned that it can be pretty unforgiving, especially if you're just starting out.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's not the easiest wood to shape. So then there's Douglas fir, which seems to be a favorite for both experienced timber framers and those just starting out. What makes it such a good all-around choice?
Well, like you said, it's more manageable than oak, easier to work with, but still incredibly strong. Just that perfect middle ground between being strong and also manageable, workable. And you also can't beat the affordability factor. Douglas fir tends to be easier on the budget than oak, which is always a plus.
Oh, yeah, especially with those costs adding up for larger projects, that's a big deal. Now we can't forget about spruce. It sometimes feels like it's overshadowed by oak and Douglas fir, but it's still a popular wood, especially in construction. What are its strengths?
Yeah, spruce is great when you need something lightweight and easy to work with. It's got a good strength to weight ratio too, not quite as high as oak or Douglas fir, but it's up there. The trade-off though is that spruce is more susceptible to moisture damage. You have to be more careful with it.
Yeah, you mentioned those medieval castles with those massive oak beams. I'd imagine part of the reason those have survived so long is that they were built to withstand centuries of whatever weather was thrown at them.
Totally. And that's key. You've got to know a wood's weaknesses, not just its strengths. And that's where, like Sam said, considering your local climate becomes so important. A wood that does great in a dry climate might not last as long in a really humid, rainy environment. You've got to think long term. What's the weather going to be like?
You've got to factor in the elements, for sure. It's about choosing a wood that can handle the weight, but also the test of time and the environment it's in. So for someone listening out there who's, ready to embark on their timber framing journey, what's the key takeaway here?
I'd say think about your climate, the scale of what you're trying to build, your own skill level. Each of these woods has its own personality, its own quirks. It's about finding what's going to work best for you and your project.
All right, so we've covered choosing the right wood for a timber framing project, but just as important is protecting that wood, right? I mean, even the sturdiest oak beam isn't going to last forever if we just leave it vulnerable to the elements.
Oh, totally. Think of it like, you build a really strong foundation that's like picking the right wood, but then you got to weatherproof it.
Right.
And that's what treating the wood is all about. It's about protecting your hard work against, well, everything: moisture, insects, even fire.
And luckily, we've got some great advice from our expert timber framer, Sam, on that. One thing he really stressed was that wood treatment, it's not just for those big, fancy projects.
Absolutely not. It's easy to think like, oh, I'm just building a garden shed. It's not a big deal. But those smaller projects, they're still investments. Treating that wood, even just a basic sealant, it can really make a difference in how long it lasts.
Definitely, yeah. It's about respecting the materials no matter what you're building. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of those treatment options. Sam mentioned both commercial preservatives and natural alternatives. What are some of the key things to think about there?
Well, commercial preservatives are often really effective. They're designed to combat those big threats to wood, things like moisture and fungal growth. You've got oil-based and water-based preservatives, each with their own pros and cons as far as how long they last, how you apply them, and even their environmental impact. Oil-based will usually give you like more heavy-duty protection, especially if you're in a really humid area, but
Hmm.
they can be a little messier to use, and some people aren't crazy about the smell. Water-based options, on the other hand, tend to be easier to work with and they don't have as strong of an odor, but you might have to reapply them more often, especially if you're dealing with a lot of rain and moisture.
It's a trade-off, like with so many things in life, right?
Right.
But for someone who's looking for a more, I guess, natural approach, Borate selenium seemed to be getting more popular. I'll be honest. Before this deep dive, borate sounded kind of like something you'd find in a chemistry set, not a wood shop.
I know, it does sound pretty official. But borate is actually a naturally occurring mineral, and it's been used for a long time as a wood preservative. Basically, it works by disrupting the life cycle of those pesky insects and fungi that love to snack on wood.
So it's like, what, giving your wood an invisible suit of armor?
Yeah.
You mentioned it disrupts the life cycle of insects and fungi. Does that mean it's also safe for, like, humans and pets?
Yeah, that's a great question and one I think a lot of people have. And generally speaking, yeah, borate solutions are considered safer for humans and animals than some of those harsher chemical preservatives, especially once they've had time to dry. But as always, it's crucial to read those product instructions carefully, choose brands that you trust, and follow those safety guidelines every step of the way.
Absolutely. Safety first, always. Now, we've talked about protecting against moisture and insects, but what about fire? Especially for anyone who's building in a wooded area, that's got to be a concern. And Sam did touch on fire retardants a bit. How do those work, and what should people know about them?
Fire retardants are pretty interesting, actually. They don't make wood completely fireproof. Like, I don't think anything can do that. But what they do is slow down that combustion process significantly. So say you've got a wooden beam that's been treated with a fire retardant and it gets exposed to flames. What happens is that the treatment releases chemicals that actually make it harder for that fire to spread. It's like buying precious time, for firefighters to get there or for you to get out of a dangerous situation.
That's so important, especially in those first few minutes of a fire. Now, I know we talked earlier about choosing your wood, but Sam also mentioned that cedar is naturally more fire resistant. Is that something worth factoring in right at that wood selection stage? Even if it means maybe sacrificing a little bit of strength, at least for certain parts of the structure?
Definitely something to keep in mind. Cedar's got these natural oils that make it a lot less likely to catch fire and burn quickly. In fact, that's why it's often used for things like siding and shingles, especially in areas with wildfires. But you're right, it might not be the best choice for those really heavy-duty support beams where you absolutely need maximum strength.
Right. So again, it's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
You might choose cedar siding for that fire resistance and then go with, say, Douglas fir for those main beams where strength is the top priority.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the strengths and limitations of each material. And honestly, a lot of times it comes down to using a combination of different types of wood and different treatment methods to get that optimal protection, that optimal performance.
It's like each piece has a purpose. And that kind of gets to the heart of timber framing, right? It's this blend of like artistry and really understanding your materials. But once you've got that knowledge, the things you can create are incredible. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've talked about what to use, those different wood treatments, but what about how to use them? I'm ready to get practical here. Okay, so we've talked about choosing the right wood, we've talked about the different treatments, but now I want to know how to actually use this stuff. Like, what do I do once I've got my wood and my chosen treatment? What's the process actually look like?
Well, the first thing to remember, and this is something that Sam, our timber framing guru, really emphasized, prep is everything.
So we're not just talking about, like, gathering your tools and making sure you've got everything you need. You're talking about prepping the wood itself.
Yeah, exactly. You want a clean slate before you start putting anything on there. Just like if you were painting a wall, you wouldn't slap a fresh coat of paint on a dirty wall, right? You got to clean it first.
They got to get that prep work in. Okay, so clean wood. What else?
Dry wood. Moisture is like the enemy here. So if you've just pressure washed or it's been like a week of nonstop rain, make sure that wood has plenty of time to dry out completely before you even think about applying any treatment.
Yeah, because that trapped moisture, that's just asking for trouble down the line, right?
Oh, yeah. It's like inviting rotten decay to set up shop in your beautiful timber framing project. Not exactly the look we're going for.
Definitely not. Okay, so we've prepped the wood. It's clean, it's dry. Now we're ready to apply that treatment. What should people keep in mind during that process?
This is where you want to channel your inner artist a little bit, because even application is key. Whether you're using a brush or a roller or a sprayer, and by the way, they each have their own little quirks, you really want to make sure that you are coating that wood evenly. Like, think of it like putting on sunscreen. You don't want to miss a spot.
And no skimping on those coats either. Just like sunscreen, you got to make sure you're using enough. Speaking of not missing any spots, Sam mentioned something called end grains. What are those, and why do they need special attention?
Ah, yes. End greens, those are those exposed pores you see at the ends of cut lumber. They're like super absorbent. Moisture just loves to sneak in through there. So when you're applying your treatment, make sure you give those areas some extra love.
So it's not just about slapping it on there willy-nilly. It's about like understanding how that wood is structured, where that moisture might try to get in.
Yeah.
It's like you're outsmarted those little water molecules.
Exactly. See, you're thinking like a pro now. Oh, and here's another pro tip from Sam himself.
Yeah.
If you know you're going to be cutting the wood further, like trimming it down, try to apply your treatment before you make those cuts.
So like if I'm planning on cutting down a long beam, for example, I'm better off treating the whole thing first and then making my cuts afterwards.
Exactly. That way, even those freshly cut surfaces are protected from the get-go. Now, I know sometimes life happens and you have to make cuts after you've already applied the treatment. If that's the case, no stress. Just make sure you go back and give those freshly cut ends an extra coat or two.
It's all in the details, isn't it? Those little things that can make such a big difference in the long run. It's like anything else worth doing. You got to take your time.
Exactly. Don't rush the process. And hey, if you're not sure about something, there's no shame in asking for help. There are some amazing online timber framing communities out there, tons of resources, not to mention seasoned craftspeople who are usually more than happy to share their knowledge.
It's all about learning from each other, right? And who knows, maybe you'll discover a passion you never even knew you had. Well, on that note, I want to thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of timber framing. We've covered a lot of ground here today, but I hope you've walked away with a better understanding of how to choose the right wood for your projects and how to keep it protected for years to come. Remember, whether you're building a timber frame home or a simple garden shed, the principles are the same. Choose wisely, treat well, and build with passion.